Welcome back to Business Week on Arise News. I'm joined now by economist Kelvin Emmanuel, who's also director at Obsidian Achene, Nigeria. Thanks for joining us on the show and looking resplendent in your agbada and fila.
Thanks for having me.
Great stuff. So I want us to start with Egypt. Egypt is facing a massive financial crisis, devaluation of the Egyptian currency, dollar scarcity. You know, this is like all over Africa now. Mm-hmm. I think we can relate to the Egyptian situation.
Yeah, there are many similarities. And then this is especially considering that in November 2016, Egypt agreed to allow the Egyptian pounds to float. And now your black market premium is 44.2%.
Oh, wow.
The difference between the official exchange rate in Egypt and the parallel market. The official exchange rate is exchanging at 31 Egyptian pounds to USD. The black market is going at 70 pounds to USD. You know, and Egypt has like a debt to GDP ratio of somewhere around 94%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Inflation is about 33.7%. And just 2 days ago, I think the Egyptian central bank increased interest rates to 22.25%. So you have the wide gap, exactly a little over 10% in terms of the inflation to interest yield curve difference. Nigeria has an inflation to interest yield curve difference of 10.15%, 18.75% for MPR, and then 28.9% for headline inflation. You know, so Egypt has quite a number of issues, especially considering that it has like $8.8 billion of foreign credits, Eurobonds maturing in June 2024.
How is it going to pay that?
Yeah.
And it's going to the IMF as well to look at a borrowing package, a rescue plan, which many other African countries are going to. I mean, is that really ultimately the solution, or are there underlying economic and structural issues that Egypt can tackle in order to stabilize the economy?
Well, tourism is booming in Egypt, which is a major source of foreign exchange. Egypt currently has a 220,000 total in terms of hotel rooms. They welcome 14.9 million visitors in 2023. The Minister of Tourism says that they are expanding over the next 4 years to 30 million visitors in terms of expectation, and they want to double the size of the hotel rooms in Egypt. But then the issues I see that are threats to the tourism sector, and is also threats to the revenues they get from the Suez Canal, is the conflict between Israel and Palestine, because Palestine shares a border with Egypt, and the fight between Israel and Palestine is affecting the Sinai region in Egypt. And a lot of ships are diverting through the Cape of Good Hope, Southern Africa, all the way down to West Africa and the Western Hemisphere. You know, so it's a hit to the revenues. Egypt usually does somewhere around maybe $7 to $10 billion in revenues from the Suez. So this whole issue with the Houthi rebels and the US, you know, the coalition is set up to fight the Houthi rebels, and Houthi saying that if Israel doesn't, you know, cease fire in Gaza, they are going to continue attacking vessels in the Red Sea, is really a threat to Egypt's future in terms of revenue from Suez Canal, tourism. You know, last year in October, a policeman shot an Israeli tourist. That was like a really negative sign, even if it didn't impact, because the tourism sector grew 8% in 2023. It's a cause for concern for tourists and tourism. You know, you also have the issue of, you know, diaspora remittances that has dropped 30% in Egypt, and the fact that Egypt's supply chain is actually exposed because of how much of agricultural commodities that it imports into the country, and the fact that Egypt doesn't have backward integration because it's in a desert and it's difficult for you to grow a lot of these commodities in Egypt. So the government has been working on, you know, building industrial manufacturing zones. I'm aware that 2 years ago they finished building like a manufacturing complex for grain and processing in Egypt that cost about $420 million US. And they are also trying to see if they can set up irrigation in the Red Sea to actually backward integrate.
So, I mean, it sounds really like a plethora of issues, and it also highlights the link between geopolitical risk and economic sustainability and stability, because Egypt is such a strategic zone around the world with the Suez Canal. And I think, you know, this further highlights how security itself can undermine economic stability.
Exactly.
And the ability of a government to attract the revenues, the foreign revenues it needs to stabilize the economy. But look, I think a lot of Nigerians listening to this will share similar sentiments with the Egyptians around this planned economic stabilization plan, and we'll be watching that story very quickly. We also want to discuss China, another strategic global player. China's Purchasing Managers Index showed an expansion of economic activity in January, but we all know the issues that China is facing. Does this tell us that there's a real economic stabilization and recovery on the way in the Chinese market?
I think the slowdown is cyclical. Manufacturing output, I think, dropped to 49.2%, both services that closed at 50.7%. I think it's cyclical. The Chinese economy is on sound footing. Last year, they did EV sales of 9
You say it's on a sound footing.
It's on a sound footing.
So what are the readers, I mean, the feelers you're getting?
So the whole situation around Alibaba and the planned IPO of Alipay, I think, when Jack Ma went out of circulation for a bit, and the Chinese government clamped down on him because of his advocacy on certain areas of the economy, kind of dampened foreign investor appetite for China, and you could see that some American corporates are moving slowly away to India. They're moving to Vietnam for their manufacturing. So I think in terms of the tight grip of the Politburo, the Chinese Communist Party, on the economy, and especially as it regards capitalists who are dissenting on government, is a threat to China's long-term economic plan. So I believe that it's important for President Xi to adopt the posture of Wen Jiabao, his predecessor in government, who was more liberal in terms of the opposition, the people who want to dissent, who are expressing their frustration.
But
worries.
you made a comment. You said the Chinese economy was on sound footing, and I look at the property crisis with Evergrande, the recent crisis there. I look at some of the government saying it was going to bail out the stock markets. There was a $6 trillion sell-off a week ago on the stock markets, and that crash had been coming for the past 2 years. And I look at the declining birth rates and some of these other figures, and I'm wondering what the silver lining in the Chinese economic cloud will be.
The Chinese government has actually reviewed the policy on the one-child policy, but then it has the fact that this one-child policy has been on for decades, has had a cultural, a psychological effect on the people. So, I was in China last month, and in my conversation with my host, he told me personally that even if they reviewed the one-child policy, that him and his wife are not looking to, have another child apart from the one daughter they have, So I think if they can, go on sensitization to let people know that they can have more than one child, it's going to impact on the young population you have in China.
Yeah.
I also think that the supply chain for manufacturing in China is quite cheap compared to any other part of the world. Tesla is actually cheaper in China than it is in the US.
Okay, cheaper than in India?
Yeah, it is cheaper in China because of the supply chain for aluminum, cobalt, and lithium. China owns around 55% of all lithium mines around the world, outside of Australia. China is one of the largest. The Chinese government opened a $120 billion credit line for lithium miners globally because they want to control the supply chain for lithium, and they want to be the global leader, which they are currently, for EV manufacturing. So I think that the supply chain in China is still the most competitive around the world. And when you talk about manufacturing output, there's one major indicator you look at, that's the supply chain.
Yes.
The supply chain is in sound footing, and they have an edge over the likes of India and other players in Southeast Asia like Vietnam and Philippines and Bangladesh. It's going to be difficult for other companies, other countries to compete. Europe right now and the US, it's difficult for them to compete, especially Europe. Europe can compete with China.
Yeah. Interesting that we're running out of time, and I don't want us to forget some of our stories, and really good thoughts there on China, but you seem quite bullish about the prospects of the economy, which is great. There are two stories I want to talk on. Dangote importing crude from the US. I think to people who observe global commodity markets, this seemed almost inevitable to happen given where Nigeria's production is. But should we really be concerned about this?
We should.
Okay.
I'm aware that the board of Dangote has been considering this since 2022.
Okay.
And they saw the future, obviously. They started talking with Trafigura and Vitol since 2022.
Yeah.
So I wasn't surprised when I saw it, but I was disappointed.
But also, North American crude grades come at a discount to
It
your
does.
Bonnie
It
Lights
does.
and your sweet
And
crude from this part
does.
of the
You can
world.
also say from a business perspective that heavy crude with API grades over 37, 38, in terms of the gravity of the density of the crude oil grade, actually has 40% non-transportation fuel as compared to light crude that has 20% non-transportation fuel. But the downside or the reverse to that is that you have Nigeria as a major crude oil producer and
Importing
a member of
crude
OPEC,
from another country.
Importing crude from another country. The landing cost of importing crude from another country will make it difficult for Dangote refinery to not to raise. No, not. I think he's going to make profit.
Okay.
But the landing cost is going to make it difficult for him to price PMS and other commodities at a level where the government doesn't have to apply subsidy.